Hey everyone, there's a small note from the author and a warning from myself. This story does contain violence, anger, and gore, just a warning for those of you who are sensitive to these things. Also, spoiler for Hawk's backstory and climb into the hero world, especially chapter 185. There's no main story spoilers, and there's nothing about his missions or powers or etc. or anything like that. But I just wanted to put this in there for those of you that would rather read past that point or get more into who he is before you listen to this story. Alright, here we go. Cue the intro. You absolutely abhorred Takami's guts. Well, not even that word in particular could encapsulate the boiling hot rage that simmered in your chest whenever you saw him training by himself in your family dojo. He had the body, the posture, the skill, and the gender that your father had so desperately wished for his one child to have. In your defense, you could still stand toe-to-toe with your family's adopted son. However, even if your ability with the sword might have surpassed that of a regular samurai's, you've never had an easy time forcing the freeloader to his knees. There was always a fire that burned in his golden eyes that he had no plans on letting you snuff out without a fight. And that only fueled your lasting resentment for him even further. "You're making an absolute mess out of everything," you hissed as you stomped into the dojo, pointing at the rack of towels that Tamaki had toppled over when he lost his grip on his training sword. The young man drawled out an exasperated sigh, wiping off the sweat on his brow with the back of his hand.
"I could have easily fixed that without you making a fuss out of it, sister."
You shot him a warning glare as you piled the towels neatly on top of the other. "Don't you dare call me that, Takami!" He smirked, padding over to the rack to pick up his sword from the floor. The scent of musk and sweat clung to his loose training attire, and you made a disgusted noise as you pushed him away. Takami chuckled before resting the wooden sword in hand on his shoulder.
"If you won't stop calling me by a name I do not wish to be called,"
he began, smiling unpleasantly,
"then I won't stop grating on your nerves either, sister."
"I'll die first before I acknowledge you as a Minamoto," you growled, pushing past him roughly as you stormed out of the dojo. The fact that your family, the Minamotos, had bred remarkable samurai for generations didn't do you any favors either. With your father refusing to remarry after your mother's passing, the only way to produce an heir was to adopt a son. As with other samurai families, the lineage was entirely patrilineal. So even if you could just find a decent man to wed and supposedly bear a child with, your offspring would have limited power over the family hierarchy, because he was born from a female Minamoto. And so came the day your father came back to the family estate after a month-long mission. Hiding behind his legs was a boy with golden hair and eyes to match. You had studied him intently at the time. The boy seemed about your age. He looked scared out of his wits, like a baby deer that would bolt at the first sign of a threat.
"Paige, this is Kigo.
Your father had introduced, egging the younger boy to come forward.
He's one of the survivors of the Takami Purge. I have adopted him as my son, and he will be the heir to this estate."
You frowned at the sudden news. "But you informed me that the rights of the estate go to—"
Yes, I know what I said.
He sighed as the child, Keigo, retreated behind him once more, startled by the way you raised your voice.
"Our family lives by the traditions forged from the years of bloodshed. It would be a disgrace to our ancestors to dishonor their legacy just because—"
"I was born a girl?" Before you could even have the chance to choke out the words, the boy had collapsed onto the tatami, looking as pale as a ghost. Your father barked for one of the nearby servants to get a room ready, but he just left you standing in disbelief, not having bothered to spare you any other explanation. You've been under his roof for 15 years, yet a boy he just picked up off the streets was receiving far more fatherly affection than he'd ever given you. Things went even further downhill once the Takami boy began training under the same teacher as you. Toshinori-sensei was a kind mentor. He was the one who showed you the ropes in becoming a samurai as you grew up. and he'd never once discouraged you of your dreams despite being a woman. But seeing him cater to Takumi with the same careful diligence, if not more, unknowingly planted the seeds of a grudge in the recesses of your heart. Not only did your father love the outsider more than his own flesh and blood, but your teacher also valued his potential more than he did yours. As the years passed, you've been slowly shoved to the side as the Minamoto family's heir decimated invaders from the neighboring lands without breaking a sweat. Takumi made his name known to everyone, leaving massacres in his wake with his masterful skill in war tactics. He was not just proficient with the art of sword, but he was also a samurai genius. You were ready to accept your fate, really, that you won't amount to anything you'd rather be as long as Takumi was placed on a pedestal. But then, he came. You'd been out on a mission to patrol the fields near the southern border of your homeland when you met Chisaki. You didn't think much of him at first. He was just any other traveling merchant you'd bought dinner from in the duration of your missions. But when you sat and wolfed down a bowl of udon with him, your expectations were blown out of the water. Chisaki had been the one to open your eyes about how samurais have taken control of the country and how they poisoned it with their constant warring. He told you that samurai cared for nothing but their own glory and nothing else.
Do you not want a world where everyone is equal? Where the skills of women are just as valued as that of a man's? If we raise the patriarchy of samurai to the ground, we can start anew from the ashes of their downfall.
He had whispered in your ear. His words were honey-sweet, the exact things you always wanted to hear. You played right into his hands without really meaning to. Out of the desperation for someone to finally see your worth, you thought Chisaki was the salvation you'd been praying for a long time. You thought he saw you as someone more than an expendable tool. When he'd appointed you as one of his 8 lieutenants, the pride that swelled within you was unmatched. The bloodlust that curled in your veins once he set out the shy Hizaki, his elite team of warriors, to ransack the Minamoto estate, was something you could never recover from. But true to the doctrines that you had been taught as a child, false gods should never be idolized, for it would only lead to one's demise. You, of all people, should have known how well that stupid Takumi brat fortified the defenses of not only the land's borders, but also the Minamoto's estates. Charging headfirst into the enemy territory was arrogant of Chisaki. He had completely underestimated the skills of samurai, and you had been too drunk on the idea of exacting your vengeance on those that had turned their backs on you, to envision the flaws in his plans. Before your false god could even leave his mark, he'd already been disposed of. Now, as you laid in a pool of your own blood, you could only stare vacantly at the heavens above, as the rain pricked your face like needles that dispersed once they landed on your skin. You took a fatal wound to the chest when you were outnumbered by the enemy. Students of the dojo that you no longer recognized because of how long it's been since you deserted your family. Each breath you took burned your lungs, despite the humidity that crackled in the air. But no matter how bleak things were looking for you, you still managed to choke out a breathless laugh.
You should have told me, you know.
The infuriatingly familiar voice was enough to get your heart pumping, even though you should have keeled over from blood loss right now. When you shifted your line of sight, you saw Takumi looming over you, a bruise blossoming on his jaw as he wiped the blood off his crimson-red katana, the family heirloom. You grinned at him, vision beginning to blur. Told you what, Takumi? Takumi sighed, kneeling to your side as he brushed your hair from your face. If you still had the strength in your limbs, you would have smacked him or kicked him for being so familiar. But that wasn't the case, and you could only contain the tears that welled behind your eyes as he brandished you with a pitiful gaze.
That we left you behind.
He spoke quietly, sounding almost too tender for someone who was talking to a traitor.
Maybe if I had just...
There is nothing that you could have done, you spat. My betrayal had been written in the stars before our forefathers were even conceived. Now, if you have any respect for me as your enemy at all, you will end my life right here. Takami's gaze turned hard, like he was conflicted. What was he holding back for? He'd murdered all those foreigners that threatened the land's sovereignty for years. What was so difficult about killing off another? Still, he decided to honor your final wish. The samurai got back to his feet, and you watched the way his Hiyori had been soaked in rain and dirt and blood. This was the most disheveled you've ever seen him, and the sight caused a pathetic pang of pride to ripple in your chest. You might have lost the war, but you certainly gave him a hell of a time.
Perhaps in another life,
He began as he pointed the red katana above your chest.
we'll finally see eye to eye.
You laughed mockingly, spitting on his sandals. I highly doubt that. Then he drove the sword that was supposed to be yours straight through your heart. Shit! You braced yourself on one of the nearby walls as you felt the building shake with tremors. The police have called in the aid of the pro-heroes, which had been glorified pains in the ass. It had been easy to deal with the meddling high schoolers. Aizawa had been the biggest of your problems. But facing even more of them? That was outside your repertoire, thank you very much. The moment you'd received the intel that headquarters had been breached from Mimic, you attempted to do some damage control to the full extent of your abilities. You tried planting fake clues where the police would inevitably find them, making false eyewitness statements to throw them farther off Overhaul's trail. But no matter how you tried engaging them into a wild goose chase, they still managed to trace themselves back to the truth. Your quirk came in handiest when there was a dreadful need to escape. There weren't a lot of heroes that could catch up to you once your wings have taken flight after all. With Overhaul having lost his mind at the basement, you had no choice but to flee from the situation before you could get arrested yourself. I knew he was nuts when he started experimenting on that kid, you mumbled to yourself as you kicked down an emergency exit door that led to the outside. The sunlight was almost blinding compared to the bleak darkness that Overhaul preferred. Underground mazes should be Bastion. There didn't seem to be anyone who was flanking the side of the estate, which gave you all the leeway to slip out unnoticed.
Oh? Is this where all the commotions have been taking place?
The sound of another voice coming out of nowhere made you startle in surprise. Walking down the street was an unsuspecting man carrying a grocery bag in one hand. His golden hair shone in the daylight, and his killer eyeliner that brought out the color of his eyes. Oh, okay, you had no idea why you were so particular about his eyeliner, when there was something else about him that warranted your interest even more. Protruding from his back were a pair of magnificent vermilion wings, much like your own. Hey, you began warily. Aren't you committing identity theft there, buddy? The Red Wings are my shtick. Get your own. The man chuckled heartily, like you two were old drinking buddies.
Aw, does that mean not everyone knows who I am? Damn. Do I have to dethrone Endeavorson just to get the recognition I need? I don't really want to.
Not wanting to stick around before things got ugly, you immediately shot up to the sky before you could even get another word out. You had no idea who he was. The vibe he emanated did not sit well with you. There was an inkling at the back of your head that told you that the imposter would definitely catch up to you if you weren't careful. When you were confident that you'd managed to fly far enough from him, you landed in one of the secluded alleyways in the city, one that people didn't pay much attention to. There, you brought out your cell phone before dialing one of Overhaul's close contacts for backup. Just because you bolted out of the scene didn't mean you were just going to flake off like your body moved before your mind could even process what your instincts were trying to tell you. Pinned with a razor-sharp feather to the grimy brick wall was your cell phone. Screen cracked and leaving no hope for function anymore. Then you heard the sound of footsteps emerging from behind you. Sighing, you turned around to face the same winged man from not 5 minutes ago, grinning at you from ear to ear.
It's supposed to be my day off, you know.
He laminated.
But you're one of the Shiozaki, right? Overhaul's minions?
I'd rather not answer that, you replied through gritted teeth. The winged man hollered at your animosity, flexing his wings into a stance that told you he could very much send another projectile your way, and this time he wouldn't miss. You gulped, reaching into the pocket of your trousers for your last resort.
Say, you look kind of familiar.
He pointed out.
Have I seen you from somewhere?
My answer depends on who's asking. Your fingers managed to uncap the cylindrical device, and you were merely stalling so you could slip away at the right time. He raked his golden gloves in his golden hair, giving you an incredulous look.
It still weirds me out how you don't know me. I'm the winged hero Hawks. You know, the number 2. Do you Shiozaki guys even have a TV in your rundown?
You tossed a flash grenade into the air, and it emitted a clicking sound before light exploded into the bleak alleyway. You immediately screwed your eyes shut as you darted back into the sky once more, heading south where the winds carried you into its invisible current. Once he managed to blink out the spots in his eyes, Hawks exhaled a sigh of disappointment. How rude of you, taking advantage of his penchant for talking too much to make your escape. Twice. The winged hero then walked towards the wall where he successfully caught the mobile phone that you were planning to use. Making sure he didn't get any fingerprints on it, for it was a crucial piece of evidence, he placed the device in the plastic bag he emptied out his groceries from before. He chased you across Musutofu. He'd make sure to keep tabs on this case. He wasn't really bluffing when he told you that there was something strangely familiar about you. Like the sight of someone with the same wings as him tugged on memories that weren't his own. But Hawks didn't really need to concern himself with so much about your whereabouts, for the stars themselves had fated for your paths to intertwine long before your forefathers were even conceived. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. That was Polarity by Kai, and his co-author, who I can't quite read the name of. If you like this, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. The next one will be a little sweeter. So until then, this is Teeny Doodle saying doodle on.